Now let's explore the 5 ignition sources that we will utilize within the Modern Survival course series. Now, one of these resources right off the bat is the one you do not ever want to use, if at all possible. If you've used it, you've screwed up royally. And the only way you should ever have to use it is if you are playing or doing it because all else has failed, you've lost everything you have, and this is your only final ditch means at getting a fire to get warm, etc. The first thing we're going to talk about is friction fire, bow drills. Bow drill is a wonderful skill to understand, to know how to do whenever you need to do it. We teach it. It is an absolute requirement for every instructor that I train to be able to pull off a bow drill regardless of the weather conditions. So we practice bow drill all the time. However, we do not ever want to rely on this as a fire starting resource in real life. We practice primitive, but we carry modern. So think of that one more time. Practice primitive, carry modern. This is a primitive fire starting skill. It is useful when you're doing bushcraft, woodcraft, and when you are simply training. But in real life, this is you just don't want to depend on this, period. You could die. This is a last ditch means of making a fire. So for the Modern Survival course, when we start talking about fire starting skills and practicing our fire starting techniques, this is one that we will not utilize within the context of this course. However, should you come here to my school and take other classes such as woodcraft or any bushcraft class, or certainly any advanced survival course, you will learn this skill and then you will have to rely on it real time in the class. For this class, we don't use it. But this is one of our ignition sources, bow drill. The most common and the number one fire skill that you need to master is this one. Putting your finger on this wheel and hitting that plunger. This should always be your go-to number one fire making device, simply because it's so easy to use. From the factory, this specific brand lighter is guaranteed to give you 3,000 lights with a 3-second push of the plunger. That's pretty doggone good. You can put Gorilla Tape around it, tape it up, carry an extra first aid and fire resource along this type of device. They're multi-use. We're going to show you how to make fire a couple different ways with a lighter. This should always be your number one. You should have multiples of these, one in your pocket that you carry every day, others in your kit thrown about as needed. So 2 is 1, 1 is none. Always have a lighter in a backup. You will find as the weather gets cold and at about 32 degrees, these things lose pressure and they do not want to light very well. Obviously in extreme weather, wind and rain, they do not want to light very well. So you need to learn to utilize them in those types of conditions. So when it gets too cold, you need to understand how you have to warm it up. When it gets wet, you need to know how to make it dry and functional again. We'll explore a couple of these in our fire skills segments. So a lighter is our number one go-to fire making device for modern survival. Our next one, this will be our third ignition source, is the ferrocerium rod. This is an emergency fire making resource. So should we lose our lighter, forget our lighter, break our lighter, or whatever, we don't have a lighter, this is our next go-to fire making device. I prefer a ferro rod that is at least 5 inches long with a 1/2 inch diameter rod. The reason is I like to pull off as much material at one time as I can possibly get, because this will maximize the heat and the amount of sparks that I'm able to throw down on a fire. It's said on average the sparks off the end of one of these rods is about 3,000 degrees. Way more than enough to get something ignited. So if you're pushing down a bunch of 3,000 degree sparks real fast using a pump style technique on your ferro rod, you're getting a lot of heat generated, and that's going to enable you to not only dry semi-damp material, but ignite it pretty doggone quick. So that's why I like this size. I also have diminished feeling in my fingertips just from old injuries. So having a large handle will permit me to get a hold of it, manipulate it in different ways. Like a lanyard on it, because I can lock it down in my hand and hold it as well. So if I'm really struggling or really cold, I can put it in a hand and do some different wraps with this thing and hold it in different ways where it locks in much better. So that if I lose manual finger dexterity and I can't control my fingers because I'm so cold or injured or perhaps just disoriented, I can still get a hold of this thing and scrape something along it. Now, to scrape this, of course, we recommend the 90-degree spine on our knives. That's why we put a 90-degree spine on our knives. So we can scrape things such as the ferro rod or wood material or bark. It's a processing tool, much like you'd use a cabinet scraper. So that's kind of the way we utilize the back of our knife. But anything harder than the metal will scrape a ferro rod. For example, a broken piece of glass works well as a ferro rod scraper, a hacksaw blade or another broken piece of metal. There are a number of things, a good sharp rock. Any of these things will strike or scrape a ferro rod without issue. So keep that in mind. Next, we have a magnifying lens. The magnifying lens must be at least 5 power to be the most effective for fire starting needs in a survival situation. Obviously, the sun is a renewable resource. It's going to come up every day, and it's nothing that we have to worry about being without. However, in wet conditions or overcast conditions, we know that we may not get to see it at the power that we would like to when we need fire the most. So this is a wonderful backup method of making fires. So when I don't have my lighter, maybe misplaced or forgot my ferro rod, if I at least have some sort of magnification device, I could still yet make fire in that way. It's weather dependent, obviously, but it works well. The thing you have to understand is that you need some type of a charred material to make said fire. If you get leaves or dry grasses, you can often ignite it with this quite readily. Not much problem doing that. If you find pieces of fungus, you can often char it enough through the light coming through the lens to get an ember started, and that's wonderful. That's going to grow. Then of course you can rely on making your own types of char, be it natural or 100% cotton material, to get a fire by way of an ember fairly quickly. So you're going to have to think outside the box when it comes to using one of these. All right, it takes a little bit more skill, but again, it's nothing hard. Most of us grew up playing with some sort of a magnifying glass, burning ants, and different things like that. It'll definitely start a fire with natural material. You just have to select the material properly, and you'll have great results. Our final skill or ignition source that we'll talk about is that of a steel and a piece of flint. So Flint and Steel is technically a primitive fire starting device. We don't think of it as such because we hear about it, or most of the stories we think about are during the Long Hunter era where they all did flint and steel fires. But it actually predates that by many, many, many years. So before that they were just using 2 rocks and banging rocks together until they were able to actually create steel. But that said, you have to have a carbon steel striker and a sharpened flint rock. Okay, now a rock that is called flint, that's a classification of rock. It's basically any rock over about a 7 on the hardness scale can be classified as a flint. Now technically in the United States we do not have natural true flint. That's only found in England. But we have various types of cherts, quartz, many types of stones that are all under the classification of flint because they're all hard. So if you're wondering, is that rock you have actually flint? Well, go pick up a piece of carbon steel and start banging it. If you start getting sparks, then yeah, it's a flint. That's the simplest way to tell. Don't overthink this stuff. If you're in a real survival situation and you're in a creek bed and you're picking up rocks and you're like, oh man, that looks like it might be a piece of flint. Well, break it and start banging it on a piece of carbon steel. If it gives you sparks, it's flint enough to do the job, all right? The whole idea behind this is that sharpened edge on here cuts off a microscopic piece of the steel, which oxidizes in air, thus creating the spark. So with that in mind, we have to have something to capture those sparks. And I'll tell you right now, not all steels and not all stones throw the same level of hotness when it comes to sparks. Some are only at 400 degrees and others are a little bit more. So again, we have to have good dry material to catch those sparks. So that is where the char cloth or charred pith material, plant material, really comes into play. You have to have a good source of char to take advantage of flint and steel fires. So this is another skill. We're going to show you how to make char. We're going to show you how to utilize the flint and steel to make a fire. But these comprise our 5 ignition methods when it comes to modern survival fires. The lighter, the ferro rod, the magnification lens, flint steel, and last, the bow drill or friction fire. Each of these should definitely be explored. Again, within the context of this course, we're not going to use primitive friction fire, but we will focus primarily upon the other 4 so that you can build a mastery of these items before you move on to more advanced skills, which should be done in later classes.